Today, on Third Pillar Thursday, we're going to talk about desert wastes. Um, Third Pillar is all about exploration using the environment. Of course, the first and second pillars are combat and social interactions, at least as detailed by Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. But this applies to all role playing games. And something that I feel very passionate about is the use of the third pillar, using the environment, using that explorative toolbox that seems to be lacking in a number of items. A little bit empty there. So I like to give my my 2 cents on the thing. Full disclosure, I wrote the book about it. Literally, I have a series called Cinematic Environs, and one of those books is called The Desert Waste. I actually have it right here. Anyway, but let's get to talking about some details in taking an environment and how we would use it. Why would we would use it, and some details about the desert that can enhance it, because it's far more than just sand, right? It's just silicone and annoying and just hot, and we can go a little deeper. So holistically, meaning like the larger scope of a desert means that, of course, there's no water. There's probably the chances of dehydration and a high sun with very little cloud cover. So in that instance, and I believe in the in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and there are other role-playing games that have this effect, that there's a chance of having dehydration. So if you have a game that has some kind of exhaustion mechanic, or it requires the player characters to consume supplies or something like that, the desert is a great place for that. Now, I do understand that there are a number of easy buttons, basically spell effects or background details or class functions that just allow you to kind of hand wave away those kind of things. So, for example, create water. I believe there's a background that allows you to eat very easily, or actually automatically gather food for yourself and like 3 or 4 others. There's some classes that have the excellent abilities to survive in the wilderness, whatever kind of wilderness element that is. So like a ranger chosen environment could be the desert. That's fine. This is all based on what level of grit, what level of detail you want to use in your game. So it's perfectly acceptable for a GM or a DM and the players to say, hey, we want to play more of a survival game, and we want to get rid of the easy buttons. Like, no one has the ability to create, food and water. No one has the ability to just automatically gather food and drink for their adventuring party. We should have skill rolls, and we're going to track rations, whether it's just going to be a generalized rations, like we're just going to have 6 ticks, and every time, each day we tick off one of the rations or something, or you want to get into even more detail, in which case you detail how many pints or gallons of water you have, or what kinds of food and rations you have. So maybe one person has dried jerky and another person has gathered some kind of tasteless but very nutrient cacti or something like that, or they've hunted for an animal and they're able to harvest out of the animal 3 days worth of rations, and then we need to smoke the food. So you can get very detailed if you wish. There are plenty of games and settings that have that kind of grit. Torchbearer comes to mind as an RPG that does that. The setting Dark Sun is an excellent example of taking Dungeons and Dragons and flipping it so that the very act of survival itself becomes its own reward. Now, it's not for everyone, of course. There are many people who just want it to have a very high adventure, high drama, high action, high cinematic flair. And so hunting for food and gathering supplies and becoming dehydrated isn't really for them. So you just have to make that choice. But the desert also offers a number of other things, right? So let's deal with the sand. The sand, deserts don't normally have a flat plain. It can often be, if there's a lot of loose sand, they become sand dunes. And so navigating those sand dunes and navigation itself becomes an issue. And having players get lost in the desert is a great way to introduce them to, hidden crypts and things like that. Prue, what's going on? Yeah, the Outlander background in 5e is Outlander. Lets the group hand wave hunting and foraging. Some love it. I usually think it's a bit sad because it feels like it kind of steals cool moments from the ranger types. And you know what? I find that the ranger has moved from the classic hunter, meaning hunting for food, and the survivalist, and it pretty much has moved into the monster hunter. And the hunter, the vigilante kind of role. And I miss the ranger being the one who has to gather food and supplies and shelter and find a safe haven for the group, because it removes a title and a function from the game, and then forces others. The less functions, that means that you have this crossed functionality in the game. So for example, does the ranger and rogue meet more in the middle now, or the ranger and paladin? And I would say yes, they cross over far more now than it used to be, where survival was an element to the game itself. And I think it's a little bit of a disservice too, because survivalism in itself is its own reward, right? I mean, there are television shows that talk about where people put themselves, dual survivor and Naked and Afraid, and those kind of things. Bear Grylls. Yeah, it removes the element that surviving another day is its own reward, and some people appreciate that. There are the idea that it takes a number of components to put together to just live, to just eat, to just breathe, to just drink, to me is an amazing part of role playing, because you can insert so many things. For example, just the idea of gathering water in a desert environment may mean looking for stunted little plants or something, or being a diviner and searching for water, and then having to dig for it, and then having to cultivate it, meaning like purify it, or creating a humidity shelter to gather it. Mike Gould says, when necessary, player characters will eat almost anything. The real trick is water. The concept of a dry wasteland pushes the need for water to the max. And yesterday it talked about coin and value. How important, not how, just having a jug of water would make someone rich, right? An oasis becomes gold in a world like that. And who wants to carry around a 50-pound chest of gold when I'd rather carry 50 pounds of water or something of that nature? So and by the way, full disclosure, everything we're talking about is in the Desert Waste book that I've written with myself and Alex and Rob, because we, just as I'm doing these live streams, talking and just deep diving into like little specifics about something, we do that on a on a consistent basis, and write those things down, and delve them out. Prue Prue says, I personally like when nature is a force to reckon with for the players in any way. Right. So here we are, we're in the desert. We have a lack of food and water. We may, of course, if they're going to travel out there in the first place, they're going to carry some with them. But now we have the situation where maybe we have pack animals. We need to travel away from reliable food and water sources, and we have to go into the unknown. So this also brings up a great ability to threaten the player characters, because what is an adventurer without fighting against the odds? So instead of, goblinoid raiders like orcs or bugbears or something, just, fighting for fighting's sake, what if they're trying to scatter or kill or steal pack animals that are loaded down with food and water? That would be in and of itself a great combat conflict triangle. Mike Gould says, I have a desert setting coming up dominated by a ton of homebrewed insectoid species. One source of water will be grubs. They will eat them. Or will they eat them? Will they refuse? Yeah, okay. So here we have, like you said, grubs, right? Now you can change the narrative a little bit, right? Because when they're in the forest, they're not eating like classic rot grubs. They're fighting off, what's the ank heads? Oh man, the ones that spit acid, the giant ant slash mantis creatures that spit acid, or giant beetles or insects or something like that. But in the desert, hey, those grubs that are nasty and seemingly poisonous and can burrow into your skin, popping one of those babies open, it is the Ankheg. There we go. Thank you. Popping one of those babies open might be worth it, and it might be foul and disgusting, but having the players discover that and then role playing out, maybe one of the players is like, hey, I know as a player, I know if this is a great means of getting nutrients and fluids into my body, but my character just will not eat them. I'd rather find something else. I'd rather, starve or dehydrate, and then pushing them to the position where they really need to, suffer through swallowing one of those grubs down, and whatnot. Now, also with dehydration and heat exhaustion and such, it brings up the idea of fighting to prevent your losses as opposed to just gathering a number of supplies. So, for example, if there's a loss of strength or constitution, dexterity, maybe it even starts to affect your intelligence and wisdom because your mind starts to go. Being able to find a place or find supplies to bring those stats back up. And so this would be, instead of a loss of hit points, you're losing a loss of direct statistical losses or damages. Then here's another way for the game master or dungeon master to threaten the resources of the players. So yeah, I think by making the default 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons so highly cinematic, I believe it's a disservice for those who really enjoy a little bit more grit, more survival, a little bit more hardcore role-playing type. I don't believe it's like, oh, the game sucks. I'm saying that I wish it was more middle ground, so you could turn the dials up or down from the middle instead of it being at its high level and then coming down. Prue Prue says the huge wolf spiders that hide in burrows under sand lids are cool enemies there, and possibly good sustenance should you kill it. Like wolf spiders, what are they called? I guess trapdoor spiders. Yeah, those kind of things. Mike Gould says the player characters may discover this by trying to ally with the sand kobolds that are enslaved by these insectoid monsters. It follows the lessons of watching what native species consume. And it also, and only one Des says GMs could allow only a certain types of magic for nature settings only. So combining all these ideas together, now we've what we've done is we've reskinned and retold the story, right? So maybe spiders classically, string webs in high locations, but now they're hiding underground. And so instead of just crawling along, maybe they have some kind of burrowing ability, or maybe they just burrow themselves like a sand crab or scorpion or something like that, that shifts or shimmies itself down into the sand. And the idea of having like insectoids that have enslaved kobolds, what used to be your classic enemy now might need to be an ally in the desert, because it makes strange bedfellows when everyone needs to survive, right? And the kobolds, yes, we know that they are evil, but they tend towards like the lawful evil side, and they might be very honorable and work with the player characters, especially if they know that their food and water is coming and they haven't had that. Tesla Ranger says, Michael, I read that too fast and read sand koalas. Hey, you can add sand koalas if anybody wants. Maybe their metabolism is slow. RP Gaber says, I think taking away the character's resources rather than hit points forces the players to think more creatively and can create some great moments. Absolutely. Just challenging the player characters from various directions allows some to shine more than others at various points in the game. And so then you can move that spotlight around. So just swinging at things and causing hit point damage may not be the smartest move, or it may not be possible at all. Your barbarian is not going to stop, dehydration by hitting it with 120 hit points. It just is impossible. Mike Gould says, could the trapdoor spider's webbing be mixed with sand and create tenting material? And see, here we go now. Okay, so we've got insectoids, we've got kobolds here that we can gather information from, and supplies and native species. We got trapdoor spiders making using tinted material. So maybe we need to, kill the trapdoor spider and then use that as a place to hide. And maybe the insectoid creatures or the kobolds know of these hidden locations. So when you're standing on this vast desert and see nothing, there might be these telltale bits of information that say, man, if we can just go down and find one of these trapdoor spiders, we're going to need to kill it or maybe lead it away, and then we can use that as a haven to survive the day, right? Prue says, possibly, Mike, I certainly allow my players to try. Shade is precious. And see, here we've already created in my mind, like, we've got this ecosystem going on. We've got trapdoor spiders. We need food and water. We need shade. We have to watch out for dehydration. We've got a clan of kobolds enslaved by, insectoids. We've got grubs that we can, get for fluids and such. And then on top of all that, we've got things like sand dunes, right? So sand isn't just flat. It can pile and move and twist and turn by the whims of the winds. And so climbing and ascending and descending sand dunes can be treacherous for people. So the steeper and the higher the sand dune, the more treacherous it could be. Maybe there's like orc tribes that when the player characters go to the low points or in the valleys, maybe they use that to hit the sand and have it spill and fall down on prey or even the player characters. Mike Gould says, I could see my players killing the spider and then burrowing out their nest for shelter. Absolutely. And it's a possibility. What if there's a clan that has a symbiotic relationship with the trapdoor spiders? So instead of just the classic drow and using them, maybe there are like sand driders and sand spider riders that use them as pets or mounts. And the spiders are very excellent hunters. So they capture prey, snatch them down into their pits, and then maybe there's a way to smoke the spiders out, or maybe there's a druidic cult that befriends the spiders, and so they are allowed and safely to go into a trapdoor spider haven or warren, and then get some of the the sand riders stolen. That's what Mike Gould says. Yeah, I mean, and then so they can get the prey that the spider is taken. So let's say they've captured like the giant spiders, trapdoor spiders have stolen like 6 camels and a horse. And so they can go down there and cut open the webbing and then get some meat and supplies. And in return, maybe they leave some other kind of material there for the spiders. Yeah, and sand riders don't need to be, they don't need to be drow, although drow, it would be a good excuse because drow have dark skin, you know, they have absolutely black skin, which makes a lot of sense for people to have a darker melanin in a, you know, a cloudless environment and a high sun environment. Prue says, I have a friend who has spent quite a bit of time among Bedouins. She says the best gift you can give a Bedouin is a car battery. What would good gifts for desert dwellers be in a fantasy setting? Okay. I'm not trapdoor riders, but that's cool. I would say that let's take some elements from things, I'll say call them stereotypes, because I'm not familiar with Bedouins, but the idea of just like on the open sea, maybe in the open desert, there's this idea of civilized survival. So when people meet in a desert environment, you get this idea that they share tea or share coffee, share a tent, and maybe minimal amounts of food and water together in an encampment, because there's an understanding that we are all trying to survive this harsh place, right? It's a harsh mistress, and leaving someone out there, you don't leave your enemies out there to die. And it's also a psychological effect too of meeting strangers over tea or coffee to exchange information, and that kind of thing. Tesla Ranger says, "Proof is for jump starting your camel on cold mornings." That's that's kind of nasty. So, but you know what? There is the idea of you know, using the camels as not just a mount, but as a food source as well. RP Gamer says, maybe after killing creatures that live under the desert, the PCs discover the tunnel system of this creature leads all across the desert and provides shade and easier travel. Absolutely. So here's a good excuse too, because in the desert, now you can start inserting like those burrowing animals like purple worms, sand sharks that I love, adding in burrowing elements of creatures. And then now here's your dungeon crawl, right? It's literally a dungeon crawl. And you can have your players not just go down into 10-foot by 10-foot warrens, but maybe they have to crawl through tunnels. The halfling can stand up, but the 6-foot, you know, paladin can't. Mike Gould says gifts, pottery or glass that seals away sand, textiles that resist the heat, long shafted weapons where trees are rare, spices that preserve food. Yeah, absolutely. And imagine, if you will, use the environment to shape culture, right? So maybe dwarves that live out in the desert don't mine in the classic sense, but maybe they harness like glass to use the heat, and use the heat from the sun in these big lenses to melt the sand into glass-like objects. So maybe there are these half subterranean, half above ground cities with blackened glass walls and doors, and maybe they harness weapons out of this glass, making them like sharp spear points or shields even, or hammers, or swords of long glass shafts or something like that. It's also a possibility maybe there's gnomes that are able to use illusions to create like illusionary shade of sorts, and they are very valuable as a culture in this community, hired to use their magics to create shade for people to to allow people to survive the long treks across the sand. But let's not forget a classic thing in the desert is the sandstorm. And we've got, quicksand and sand, sand rivers, because when sand mixes with water, sometimes it becomes this thick slurry. We have salt flats are possible too. Here in the States, I believe it's out in Utah. It's one of the flattest places on Earth, or at least in the States, where they have they do speed tests for automobiles, and it's just nothing but a flat plane of salt. Mike Gould says Matt Colville hosted a podcast where Dragonborn used their breath weapons to turn sand into glass objects. Absolutely. We have ourselves a number of desert-like creatures that could inhabit a desert region. So, for example, your Bahir that I mentioned the other day, that I believe Prue mentioned the other day. We have ourselves blue dragons. There's some of the gold dragons too. Tesla Ranger mentions a sudden downpour equals a flash flood. Yeah, and if you've ever watched, I love watching the Nature Channel, and there are periods of time where the rainy season comes, a flash flooding, and so the region dries up, and then just for a short amount of time, the rains come and fills what are essentially miles and miles of dry riverbeds, and that in and of itself could become a major hazard when the player characters think it's just a air quotes desert, and then it starts to fill with water and starts sweeping debris out the way and just becomes this powerful muddy slurry. And that also brings out prey and predators because they're going to want to consume the water because it's now plentiful. RP Gamer says, let's not forget nights in the desert are a drastic change from the day. Temperature drops dramatically, winds pick up, and very little to no natural light. Absolutely. Prue says the Dragonborn produced glass in my setting. Big competition for small windows where traditionally dwarves delivered thinly sliced feldspar. Not very desertly though. I would disagree with that. I think it's an excellent desert cultural aspect. RP Gamer brings up the fact that desert nights become very cold, and there's other than starlight and moonlight, you would have to bring your own lanterns and oil because there would be nothing to burn. So, absolutely magical light or something like that would be used. But remember also, without any barriers, long distance sight would make you a target, especially from, say, flying creatures or enemies that are looking over the horizon with maybe their own familiars or their own hunting birds, like hawks or falcons, or spyglass, of course, created from the glass lenses that they've harnessed from the desert, and using these spyglasses. And when they see, the cleric, lifting up their holy symbol for light in the desert overnight, it becomes a target. So maybe they have to use stay hidden at night. And of course, traveling at night means that there's a greater ability to get into trouble because of not having very good vision at night, but it also, you can avoid the dehydration by maybe camping out during the day and avoiding the high sun. There's also sun blindness. If you want to get into some real detail, you have sunburn. For those who aren't used to it. So if you have yourself some high elves and are very pale, maybe their skin starts to burn. Sorry. And along with the sand, we have ourselves a classic sandstorm, sandstorms, dust devils, those kind of things. So here's a great way to have your sand riders. Maybe the PCs are looking for the sand tunnels. There's trapdoor spiders everywhere. There's clans of kobolds and orcs and bandits on camels that are raiders, whirling dervishes and insectoids. And now here comes the sandstorm. RP Gamer says the desert is home to more nocturnal animals due to the cooler temperatures at night, which means that maybe there's far more hunters at night because of the cooler temperatures, and the burrowing animals and burrowing predators come out of their warrens and start scurrying across the desert. Maybe the giant scorpions start coming out. Yeah, RP Gamer agrees. They would be more likely to run into predators. Absolutely. And so maybe the player characters now need to use a little bit more intelligence. So if they're being hunted by, I don't know, orcish raiders that are, hunting at night, maybe they need to lead them into the trapdoor spider warren so the trapdoor spider can leap out at the enemies that are chasing them. So, you can have this big mix of conflict. And then on top of that, let's see, we have sandstorms, we've got flash floods, we've got quicksand. You got to throw some quicksand in there, where the idea is that you don't want to scramble around and panic on top of quicksand. You want to lay out on top of it and move very slowly. So when panic sets in, let's say they make a survival roll, one of the PCs falls into quicksand, and the more they thrash around, the greater chance they have of getting sucked down. So maybe getting out, the difficulty increases, or they just cause themselves to have disadvantage. And maybe they have, you roll a D4, and that's how long it is before you just get sucked down into the bottom. And now you have to, you start suffocating. Maybe if they make a survival roll, or one of the PCs makes a successful survival check, that they, scream out like, "Don't move," which means that the player character that wants to get the hell out of there, who maybe has some really good skills, is like, so now I've got to actually actively not act at all, sit, splaying out on top of this quicksand, hoping that one of my players, one of my allies will pull me out, So Poo says, how easy would it be to make your exhausted group make a questionable deal from a powerful being in exchange for getting out of a 3-day sandstorm? Right. So, hey, we've got ourselves some Naga, some Sphinxes that we want to use maybe in our world, hags, desert hags or something, which they don't have to be old crones, although that works. But maybe instead of an old hag, maybe they are like a beautiful princess, but they're in like silky burqas with their faces hidden, but they have beautiful eyes that are just hypnotic. Maybe even a version of a desert type incubus or succubus that makes deals with the player characters, and they meet these people along the way, and little by little start chipping away at the player characters and their need to survive, and making deals and selling away their souls. RP Gamer says, so it leads to the PCs having to weigh up the pros and cons of when to travel, because during the night, any unnatural light will attract things, but in the day, they'll dehydrate. Absolutely. And that moment when the sun rises and sets is not it doesn't last forever. And you can have, there's a possibility of having two opposing but never meeting cultures. So maybe one culture moves during the day and another culture moves at night, and they tend not to meet very often, but they live almost like stacked on top of each other. This idea that maybe you have a daylight Bedouin tribe that travels during the day, and then you have like a drow or dwarven or gnomish culture that travels at night, and they pass each other, kind of, it not in the night, but they kind of pass each other. And there's this great idea where the player characters may have to deal with, if you deal with the night group or the night faction, the daylight people don't want to deal with you, and vice versa. If you deal with the daylight, the nighttime people won't want to deal with you, unless of course the player characters have a ton of information. So nice. And just ask me what you'd like me to do, and I'll try my best to help. Sorry about that. I think that was a Alexa or something in the background that activated by accident, if you heard that. But anyway, also in the desert we have imagine here in the States, you have areas like the Grand Canyon, Arizona, where you have like the winds have created striations in the stone, so you can have tall plateaus and areas of deep valleys. Imagine classic Western, where you have these people that have gone across the Midwest, and the ground has cacti and red dirt and mounds, almost like mountains the size of that are actual stones in the ground, but they're like the size of small mountains, and plateaus. So maybe there's cultures that live in the shade of these plateaus, and so you could have like rope bridges connecting the plateaus, people living on top of the plateaus, that kind of thing. Prue RP Gamer having conversations there. They could have some serious weird stories and stereotypes about each other in these like I'm assuming related to the opposing cultures from Daylight and Nightlight. And RP Gamer says that would definitely be the case, like boogeyman stories for why they travel and when they do. And how many times in our own world have we had when we don't understand something, we create stories around it to explain why it is we do the things that we do, right? And then those stories then carry on long after the original reason for the story no longer exists. So you could have these boogeyman, mysticism, don't trust those people kind of ideas, and you have this middle ground where people are taking advantage of it. So you can have those encounters with those Naga and Sphinxes and hags or something, and they take advantage of the naivete between the two cultures because it's been ingrained in them so much. And if you have a desert focused world, maybe the player characters have now left their desert havens and they're going out into the world, and this is the first time they're challenging their own beliefs. So let's say you have desert type paladins that are out to, or rangers that are out to from birth trained to hate on these other groups, and you find out that these other groups are just like you, so they could have skills to kill and murder these other groups, but now they have to change their tactics and how they use them because maybe it's better just to talk to them. Prue says, yeah, and Sun forbids that their kids meet and fall in love. We like the day travelers, but we don't want you to marry one, right? There's always that NIMBY, not in my backyard. It's, yeah, I like those people, but yeah, I don't really want them to live next door to me. I love those people. Yeah, I don't, I'm not a xenophobe. I'm not a daytime, nighttime racist, but I don't want them to marry my kids. I mean, that's nasty. That's just the gods say that's just unnatural. I'm making stuff up about the gods, but yeah, that's just, yeah, we can't just have them, breeding together. That's ugh, that kind of thing. And yeah, here we go. We're cultivating like prejudices and things like that. That's where those things come from. Hey, I don't know anything about them. There must be something wrong with them. Or I need a way to cover up my fear. I know I'm just going to make them evil and to rationalize my fear of them, or my lack of knowledge, or my lack of ability to or strength to leave my own culture and then question the things that are around me. RP Gamer says maybe the two cultures tend the desert crops and animals for each other. Day tribe tends the crops that need the sun, and a night tribe deal with the animals that thrive best at night. And then imagine you have a group of murder hobos, player characters that are just like, oh, daytime, nighttime, doesn't matter, let's kill them. And they throw the whole system out of whack. Right, I got it. So they throw the whole system out of whack, and now here was this balance that was tenuous at best, but you've assaulted one of the groups, and so now who now becomes the tender of the crops? Who now protects the tribes at night? You could also do this with if this is a culture in this world, maybe the player character classes and backgrounds are dual related. So you have a daytime paladin and a nighttime paladin. You have a daytime ranger and a nighttime ranger. Maybe there's a daytime wizard and a nighttime wizard. Maybe there's a sorceress bloodline that's a daylight sorcerer and a nighttime sorcerer, where their bloodline changes. Imagine a chaos sorcerer, but you just reflavor the chaos to appeal to the daylight or nighttime. And if they are a day blooded, their chaos nature doesn't have much an effect, because all of their daylight chaos relates to the day, and it is not very disruptive. But at night, they are forbidden from using or harnessing their magical abilities, because at night maybe they glow like a fire stick or something. So during the day, maybe they launch off continual flame and burning hands and fireball and maybe even healing abilities or something related to daylight and the sun and stuff. And then at night it's the opposite. And of course you have maybe your night blooded, and the night bloods have darkness and necrotic abilities or something like that. Also, let's talk about mounted combat. Maybe the PCs can ride on the back of Sidewinder snakes or Black Widow spiders or scorpions. Maybe scorpions are used as battle platforms by halflings, where they construct these lash together these tinted membrane things, and they're on there with like crossbows or javelins or something, or maybe even catapults, or not a catapult, was a ballista, where they can launch out bolts at people. And so now you have the player characters are using like camels or giant scorpions or trapdoor spiders and things, and scrambling up and down sand dunes as they run from or run after their prey. There's so many things you can do with the desert. Like right now, we've just created ourselves an excellent culture in and around the desert, and we haven't even delved into the magic, because this was mentioned earlier in this chat. I believe as RP Gamer talked about magic and changing magic. So for example, let's throw away, I don't want to say throw away, let's throw away the classic portions of magic, meaning like the components that we use, and replace them with something desert-like. For what I mean is, we have verbal components, we have somatic, and we have material components. Maybe in a desert, the material components are all desert related. So maybe there's pieces of glass that you need to use the ichor from the blood, the fluids from dead beetles that hide in the desert, or maybe you need to use scorpions venom or poison. I'm not sure which one it is. Maybe there are a few and far between, but flying creatures like hawks or falcons or griffins or desert wyverns that exist in this world, and you need to use their skin or their teeth. Maybe clerics, in holy symbols for clerics are the teeth or claws of, or the eyes of, insectoid beetles that they use in the world. And for verbal components, maybe there's whistles or chants or songs or mantras that are used in the sun. Maybe for somatic components, instead of just complex hand motions, maybe there's dance or some kind of yoga or I guess a hypnotic trance that maybe the people who cast magic needs to use them. Maybe it's astrology. Prue says maybe those glass rods that happen when lightning strikes sand. Don't remember their name, but always found them magical. Yes, and that was even used in a modern, like a romantic comedy. But anyway, yes, there are people who create sand sculptures by sticking metal rods into the sand, and then the lightning strikes the metal rods, and when the electricity seeps down into the sand, it turns it into glass, and then they're able to retrieve the glass, the strange glass sculptures of sorts, and bring them out. They almost look Cthulhuoid in many ways, with these like tentacles that reach down into the ground. And I think they just they shine them up, get the burrs off of them, and they become these strange colored glass sculptures that are very randomized and created by nature. And of course, maybe if you see a field of metal rods, you need to run for it because of a heat lightning. But also maybe there's a way for when you see a magician upholding one of these glass octopoid-ish glass figurines, that you know that they are a powerful wizard. Maybe they are used in place of a crystal ball. And each frond on the crystal or tentacle in the crystal maybe represents a form of magic. RP Gamer says desert magics wouldn't use liquids as it is too rare and precious to waste on spells. Absolutely. Maybe there's more blood magic, and blood would be more abundant than liquid, of course. Yes. And so maybe the idea of you see a wizard and they have these scars on their wrists and their forearms. You see that they have a maybe a blood wizard has a glass. They tend to be chestless, or wear things where they can open up the vest on their chest, and above their heart is a darkened glass symbol or sphere, and when they remove it, the blood can shoot out from their very heart to create, you know, magical effects or something that could be very dark and sinister. Or maybe they have slaves, and the slaves are used in the blood magic. So when they travel in these heavy caravans, the slaves are pushed ahead of them, and anyone that knows the culture about these dark wizards knows that the slaves are killed to enhance their magic, even on the battlefield. So maybe the slaves are even tied into these large contraptions or strapped into siege weapons. And when the magic is harnessed through them, their blood turns, the bodies are used and sucked dry, so that maybe a giant fireball or bolt of lightning strikes out from these siege weapons for every body that they use to strike against the foundation of the, you know, this walled city around an oasis or something. Yeah, you can go very, very dark with it. And of course you have yourselves druids as well, you know, druids and shape changing. Side note, I'm not a fan of the idea that general druids can change into just about anything. I like limitations because I think limitations breeds creativity. I like the idea that druids have a list of animals from their own culture, and maybe they replace some with others that they learn along the way. And in this desert environment, I can imagine druids being able to wild shape into, say, scorpions, or these trapdoor spiders, sidewinder, you know, snakes, black widow spiders, armadillos. What are some other things that are out there? Those kind of things. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Maybe there's some kind of desert turtles, purple worms, you know, maybe not as big, but, you know, you got yourself some purple worms and land sharks and those kind of things. Yeah. Camel, of course. There's also, getting back to the environment, we've got, you know, there's the idea of like maybe tumbleweed, instead of living plants like trees, maybe there's cactuses or cacti that can shoot out needles. And so there's, or maybe what are you, vegapygmies that are like cactuses, and to get nutrients, they just hide in the wilderness by sinking their feet deep down to reach down to find a water source, and they just stay there. And then when they need to move, they get up and just move to another area, and then they sink their feet down or root down deep and get some more nutrients out of that way. Poo says, agree. I mean, I'll let my players go with rules as written, but I'll always encourage personalized flavor wins with wild shape. Yeah, I think the ability to turn and shape it sounds, the first thing that people say is, oh, you're nerfing my character. But if you want to immerse yourself in the setting, then my feeling is that no, you don't. If there's no T-Rexes, you've never met one, and they don't exist in this world. All you really want the T-Rex for is because you want the added hit points and armor class and stuff, as opposed to maybe discovering something like that. And so if you're playing an Arctic a druid and now you go into the desert, I feel like you should have your Arctic animals and then maybe learn from a druidic cult that is out in the desert. Maybe they are maybe you've been called to them and they are like brothers and sisters from afar, and you learn some of the new creatures that they have. No, don't buffer on me. RP Gamer says, hopefully you can still hear me. In a desert setting, your PC with the ability to become a bear would be more terrifying to the enemy because they haven't ever seen one in the desert. Exactly. I mean, turning into a winter wolf or a bear or a white owl or something like that. Poo says, as a player, I kind of live for restrictions. I find they usually breed creativity for me. And me too. And also role-playing encounters. If one person is a desert druid and another player character is a winter druid, imagine, maybe they have a little conflict with each other, just a little playful conflict. And then when they meet strangers, they may find that the desert druid is more of a brother and sisterhood, like, oh, you're one of us, okay, come along. But then also maybe they find that the winter druid is like divine. It's like we don't know what the word snow means. You describing water that is frozen makes no sense to me. We don't even understand what the term frozen is, right? You have all these great ideas. Oh, stop buffering, please. All right. So maybe this is their hint to tell me to stop doing these extremely long live streams. I don't know. But anyway, guys, I just wanted to bring up the Desert Waste. Yes, I wrote the book on it. It talked about the cinematic environs and things like that. Oh, wait a minute. Poo says true. RP. So druids from far away could be super extra scary. Advantage will intimidate at first sight of an unknown shape. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. So anyway, let's cut it short. We're almost at the hour mark, so I don't want to hold you guys too much. I just love creating ideas you can steal. Just being able to spark some thoughtful interaction amongst all of us. So anyway, I'm DBJ. I go live Monday through Friday. Oh, by the way, this is commercial time. So if you guys need to get out of here, you don't need to listen to this. This is just, personal plugging and stuff. So everybody have a good day. Thank you for joining me. For those who are in the States that are joining me very early, for those who are in a time zone that is really bizarre, I really appreciate that. It gives me, it fuels the energy I have for the day before I get the day started. And so this is my coffee. This is my way of like contributing back to the community as well. I don't get to game as much as I used to. So thank you very much for being a positive influence in my life. There are a number of you that have submitted some excellent comments to the videos. So I'm going to come up with a way of reading out some of those comments. I don't want to read out paragraphs and paragraphs of information, but B, I want to give thanks to those individuals as well. So we'll figure something out. But anyway, I'm DBJ, contributing writer to Critical Hit Publishing. My baby, my big thing is the cinematic environs. This is one example here. Desert Waste thought I'd bring up some things in it about using the environment, adding it as a layer onto your game. They kind of combine all the best elements of traps, puzzles, layers, the environment, obstacles, all of those things combined. Check it out. Check out some reviews first. I'm not telling you just to go out and spend your hard-earned money sight unseen. Check out reviews. Type in my name, type in reviews for Critical Hit Publishing, type in reviews for Cinematic Environs, and see what we're doing. We will be coming out with Vast Plains. So we're still continuing the Cinematic Environs series. Once we complete them all, they'll be put into one big compendium. But the next one is Vast Plains, the most boring region, natural region you can think of. And this will be a thick book to basically flip the script on that kind of stuff and make it very exciting to travel into those areas. Everything from mounted combat, how to design an open air dungeon on a vast plain, getting to use those mundane and exotic mounts, rules for handling mounts, taking care of them, training them, using those centaurs and minotaurs from the UA. Hopefully they'll release some official documents. So if you want to do that, and centaurs can't go into dungeons. Well, they don't have to if you have a giant plane for them to be on. Having a mounted knight, just a classic mounted knight with a lance, and being able to use that in a game, I think that would be really cool. So anyway, everyone have a very good day. I'm going to end the stream here. Thank you for joining me. Tomorrow, of course, is Eclipse Phase Friday, so that for all you sci-fi fans out there, join me then, and join me on the Facebook group for that as well. So everyone have a very good day. Thank you.